Welcome to Coffee and Contemplation, a Stranger Things podcast. I'm Robin.
I'm Sarah.
And today we'll be discussing Chapter 6, E Pluribus Unum. Welcome, Sarah. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Sarah is another friend and fellow alumna from college. And yeah, we tend to have very nerdy, bookish conversations. You, Heidi, and I have actually attended a couple book festivals together. But yeah, so if you'd like, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I guess I'm sort of an all-around nerd. I like a lot of anime and manga and books.
So what is your history with Stranger Things? Like, how did you come to it? And sort of overall takeaway and perspective on season 3 in particular.
I might have got into it because of you, because I don't usually have Netflix, but I'd seen some things that you'd posted about it, and I liked your recommendations. So got Netflix for a month, I think around when season 2 had come out, and me and my brother just binged the first 2 seasons, and we really enjoyed it. You know, there was a wait until the season 3 came around, and we didn't get it right away, and my brother moved to the UK in between that time. So yeah, Robin was talking about season 3, and I got Netflix again to check it out. Me and my brother watched the first episode of season 3, and we hated it. So I messaged Robin asking, like, does it get better? I didn't like how Hopper's character seemed to have changed, because he was one of my favorite characters before.
That's a common theme in this season. Yeah.
And then Robin said, well, it gets better after a few episodes. So I think we watched episodes 4 and 5 after that, and we're like, wow, they found their plot. This is pretty exciting, if more violent, I think, than I remembered. We didn't end up finishing it, so recently I just went back and watched all of it, and I enjoyed it quite a lot from episode 3 onwards. So yeah,
big same. That's kind of been everybody's general takeaway. Mm-hmm. So we're consistent on this podcast. Okay. Hopper in particular has been one of the big disappointments. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think I had to sort of get over that he was a different character in order to enjoy the rest of the season.
So well, cool. So a lot to discuss then. But first, coffee selections for today. So I am drinking my often consumed Highlander grog today, but I thought this episode has some pretty creepy stuff in it, so I'm drinking it from my Wicked. I have a mug from the Wicked musical, so I have a mug. It's just black and has the title Wicked on it, and I thought that's as close to creepy as I get with my coffee mugs.
I'm drinking whatever coffee Robin gave me.
It's Dunkin' Decaf.
Okay, thank you. And it's in a cute jellyfish mug, which my friend gave to me.
It's adorable, by the way. Yeah. And now that we've acquired coffee, let's proceed with contemplation. We open back up with the Scoops troop with Steve, Dustin, Robin, and Erica backing away from the window that they can see the gate through. Dustin and Steve in particular, they share a look, and they even say the gate. Then when they backtrack, they realize that George, the guard that Steve beat up, is gone. And that's when alarms start to blare, and guards chase them through the base, and they barricade themselves in a room. Steve and Robin barring the door so that Dustin and Erica can escape back into the ducts. And then Steve and Robin are thus captured and held at gunpoint. I remember thinking on first watch, there's no way they don't get caught here. Right. It was kind of a miracle they haven't been caught yet. Mm-hmm. And they do get caught. And it must be said, Steve is the one who stays behind first to bar the door.
And he calls Robin to join, which I thought was interesting.
Mm-hmm. I do love Dustin's "I won't forget you."
Yeah.
But then, we swing away from that to the hospital where Will senses the Mind Flayer again while Nancy flees from the newly made flesh monster. Mm. And I remember thinking, oh, now Will feels the Mind Flayer.
Right, yeah, same. He's usually a little ahead of, the lights flickering.
Well, it's not, I feel like they, because my note here is Why does he feel it now? Because plot. Because I guess they couldn't figure out how to do like the cutting away like back and forth concurrently, because normally his sensing stuff like that is simultaneous, but
like when it switches between Nancy and Jonathan and then the group of kids, the time may be a little off. They might be getting it before, but we get Nancy and Jonathan's concurrently.
Like we don't see it until that's very true. I prefer that, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense. Like
it's my headcanon.
Yeah, like the thing is forming, but Will is like la la la.
Right.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Nancy barricades herself in a hospital room, but the monster shapeshifts to slide under the door and like through the door grate, and 11 arrives just in time to throw it out the window. This is so gross. I don't think the goo bothers me so much as the bones.
Yeah.
That's the thing that makes it like uncomfortable for me. Like it's like,
yes.
Ugh.
Yeah, I honestly, I had a hard time watching this scene physically because the lights are flashing so much. And it's just like quite light sensitive, so it'd be nice if they toned it down a little bit.
Yeah, it lasts a long time. Like, because something at first I thought of was like, I speak to this more in chapter 5, at the end of chapter 5, like when all of this starts. Stylistically, I felt like this doesn't feel like what we've seen before. And then I remembered that it is, though, because it feels very much like what they did at the end of season 1 when they're in the classroom and Elle takes on the Demogorgon. But it doesn't feel as like difficult to take in. It doesn't feel like that stuff goes on quite as long, and maybe because there are sections where the lights aren't flickering. I kind of wondered also if they did something with the frame rate or the shutter speed.
I get that it makes sense of what they were doing to an extent, because I feel like that kind of creepy monster with the CGI and whatnot, it's creepier if you can't fully see it, I feel like.
Yeah. It got old very quickly, especially because I watched 5 and 6 back to back.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, okay, can we move on? And there's a lot more happening, I think. And kind of to that point, like, this is another example in this season of somebody getting hurt and taking no damage. Nancy gets thrown against the wall.
Same with Jonathan. I think he gets whacked a couple times, and I'm like, broken ribs, more broken ribs.
Yeah.
But then he sort of limps a little while and later, and then they just kind of...
Even watching it this time, I was like, how does Nancy get out of this? I was like, how does... And it's like, oh, right, Elle saves the day.
Yes. With the Nancy, the monster like screams in her face instead of biting her head off, which he might have done with other people. Yeah.
Rather than like put the face hugger on her, like unless maybe the Bruce Tom hybrid thing doesn't have that capability. That's something only the Mind Flayer can do. But again, why doesn't it just grab her and run off? I do love, though, Elle's very like ferocious come at me attitude.
Oh yeah, like she just like goes whack 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 and then throws it out the window, and then it like slides away like, I see where I'm not wanted.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's another area where I have some questions. Like, is this technically the same? It's a different blob, like physical blob, but like, does this thing have the echo or the collective memory of what happened in the sauna test? Because part of what I loved about that episode is the fact that it's so personal between them. And then, of course, we also see later in this episode that there's a continued like relationship that develops between Billy Flayer and 11. Kind of like, so this is just a different entity entirely? Are they a hive mind? I don't know. There's so much like ambiguity around it all.
Yeah.
All of that said, though, gross and everything, yeah, I actually kind of enjoy this like tail end of this sequence quite a lot. Like once they rush out like onto the street.
Oh, I was kind of curious. At the very end of that part, the monster goes into the sewer, and then Billy and Heather are standing there and they say like, it's time. I'm curious why they decide that. Is it because like they can see that they're almost strong enough to defeat Elle?
I'm not sure. There's so much about the plan, the timing of the plan, the choices that the Mind Flayer makes that I don't fully understand. I kind of feel like that almost feels like generic sinister villain line 243. Like it doesn't... I mean, my guess would be that it's referring to what essentially happens at the very end where they all converge and then melt down and converge again. But yeah, like why now?
Because they don't do that until Billy meets with 11.
Yeah, until she, like, kind of opens up her mind to him. Mm-hmm. I don't know. That's a really good question. Well, and that's a question, actually, that I kind of had as well, was why haven't Billy and Heather been assimilated yet? From strictly, like, a subterfuge perspective, I'm like, wouldn't you want to pick somebody else now who, like, who, like, the kids and Nancy and Jonathan don't know about? Because now they're all very much aware. And then Heather has even less of a significant role than Billy does. So, yeah, why haven't they been broken down and absorbed?
Yeah, it does seem like Billy gets sort of specifically chosen by the monster because of compatibility or because he has he's seen Elle around, whereas the other people may not have. Mm-hmm. But if that's the case, then it seems like he should then flay Max and then have an even closer connection.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It makes me look a little more favorably on it, though, because, yeah, you're right. I guess it has to be, like, if Billy is, like, the lens or the filter through which the Mind Flayer can look through the rest of the world, and I guess that does make sense.
Mm-hmm. It seems like the Mind Flayer is sort of retaining his consciousness more than the others.
Mm-hmm. That's when we get our title sequence. So the writer is Curtis Gwynn, and this is the same director as the last episode, Uta Briesewitz. I'm not sure how much, like, stylistic similarities I see in the direction between these two, because 5 and 6 feel pretty different tonally to me, but they also don't feel hugely disjointed like some of the others. So Mayor Klein meets with the Terminator at the assembling 4th of July fun fair. Yeah, basically it's this power standoff between these two. I've always hated the concept of the Gravitron.
Yeah,
that spinny ride. Like, I have a pretty weak stomach, so I could never do rides like that. So as soon as they stepped inside it, I was just like, nope. Hopper. He attempts to appease Alexei, who, while insisting on a specific flavor of Slurpee, this is strawberry, I wanted cherry, communicates through Murray and eventually refuses to talk until his demands are met. Okay, if you're not going to bring me the right thing, no, I'm not going to talk to you. And then Hopper starts to, like, throw him around.
If that had been a lot more restrained, where Hopper's sort of like reining in his anger and then lets him go, and then the others are like, what are you doing, kind of thing, then I feel like that would have made it better for me. Because when he's just like, you know, throwing him around, it's like, I don't know, is this supposed to be slapstick? I don't get it.
Yeah, because, like, he, in what appears to be a fit of stupidity, Hopper throws Alexei outside and throws him the keys, and Joyce and Murray are like, what are you doing? And I remember when Heidi and I watched it the first time, we were like, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, and then Hopper does this whole breakdown of, like, why this is going to work, and because Alexei has nowhere to go and they're going to kill him, you know, and, like, he turns out to be right. Mm-hmm. And I do have to say, I actually like his line of thinking. I think that what Hopper is thinking is actually pretty brilliant. But if he'd been, like, restraining himself and then it built to that.
Mm-hmm. It would make a lot more sense with his plan as well. Like, if he's planning to be like, you know, you're better off with us than them, why do a big, like, throwing him around show of force? Like,
absolutely. I hadn't even thought of that. That's a great point. Like, I find myself wondering what was the point of doing it this way. If they wanted still that almost, like, mildly arrogant vibe, then I could see that kind of energy being like, you really think you're better off with them? Go ahead. And very cool, very, like, here are the keys, go ahead.
Yeah, I felt like we were kind of put in Joyce's position, where Hopper's then like, I told you so, kind of thing. It's like, okay, but you could have done that better.
Hopper could have said something like, trust me, Joyce, because Elle says that to Mike later. Like, that could have been an interesting way to, like, parallel that, was to have him ask for her trust. Like, trust me. I'm not being frivolous here. Like, I do know what I'm doing. And that might have been a nice, like, growth on Hopper's part, too. Like, we're seeing him continue to come out of some of this earlier, more reckless behavior. But no.
Yeah. I also, I was trouble seeing that Hopper would use that much aggression throwing somebody around, but still be having a plan. I mean, my association is just that, like, if someone's totally losing their cool like that, they don't really have a plan.
Well, especially when it's a lot of empty threats. Like, Hopper doesn't actually hurt Alexei, right? He doesn't actually, like, hit him or anything. Like, he throws him around a lot. And then he's like, fine, go. Like, so it's a lot of posturing. And I know that if I was in Joyce's position, I would have been like, that was a huge risk you just took. Like, you really would have been willing to throw all of that away just to prove what a badass you are? Like, what if you'd been wrong? What if Alexei was stupider than you would give him credit for?
Or more scared of what Hopper just did, like, this guy's nuts, as opposed to, yeah.
Or what if he had other contacts that we didn't know about? Like, another place, another safe house he could go to that you hadn't counted on. In the vents, though, we could actually get one of my favorite scenes in the whole season, which is Dustin clearly caught Erica up on all of the events of the past 2 years, and Erica rolls with it, though, you know, this is when they're trying to figure out how to turn off the fan so they can keep going. But she's highly skeptical that Lucas had any part in any of it. And then she does the math on how long it will take them to walk back to the elevator, which prompts Dustin to figure out that she's a nerd. And she denies it, but Dustin then breaks down exactly how she's a nerd. She's a math whiz, a political nut, and she's into My Little Pony. Nerd. I love this scene.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
I love that they made Erica a nerd, like, but that they kind of snuck it up on us. Like, this is one area where I'm like, no, this was hidden from us, but in a way that really, really works.
I noticed that we have 2 scenes in a row where a guy is showing up a girl. But Dustin's is really cute, and he's not a jerk about it.
And I would say that part of what I like about the scene is the fact that Dustin knows My Little Pony. Like, he shows absolutely no embarrassment or hesitation. He's not apologetic about it at all. He's not like, yeah, I know about this. He's just like, no, I completely am familiar with this, and it follows all these nerd tropes. That was such a surprise. But it is true. I had not thought of, well, I don't know. In a way, I would almost say that Dustin is like, it almost feels like he's trying to, like, empower her in a way. Yeah,
he's not making fun of her. He's just kind of like, hey, you're not being honest, or you're not telling the truth about this. And also, I find it interesting, like, in the meantime, between when we get to them next, they actually, like, Dustin's plan is to get out, right? Maybe because Steve told him to, but then they actually stay, which is what Erica was kind of leaning towards.
That's true. Yeah, because, like, later on, yeah, Dustin says, like, the best way we can help them is to get back up, basically, which is, that's a relatively smart position, but if they had waited, it's very likely that, I don't know about Robin, but Steve probably would not have made it out. I don't know.
He would have been maimed,
probably. But yeah, I love these two together. I'm really glad that Erica is going to be in that group in season 4, because, like, I want to see more of, like I like her and Dustin together. Like, I don't know, I think Gabe Matarazzo tends to do well with whoever they pair him up with, I'm noticing. Like, he plays off of his co-star, whoever that happens to be, really well. But I really like him and Priya Ferguson together. Like, they worked really well, and I'm interested to see if they continue to have any more banter next season. That'll be fun.
I just love Erica. I like every scene that she's in.
She's great. And but yeah, this is when we see that Steve is having quite a bad day.
Oh yeah.
The Russian colonel is brutally interrogating him, unconvinced that Steve and Robin's presence in the base are accidental and that he just works for Scoops Ahoy. And after being beaten unconscious, Robin is brought in and tied up with him. I talk a lot about Steve as a character on this podcast, so it's not surprising that I don't enjoy watching him getting this beat up. I kind of appreciate that they don't, like, there's some humor in this scene, but not as much as I think some other scenes would imply that there would have been. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
He's frightened, this is like one of the few occasions where I feel like the show is not, like, making fun of Steve's fear.
Yeah, it has some empathy for them because, I mean, both Robin and Steve, they're like, this is nuts. I can't believe we're here. Like, it's terrifying, but they're also kind of like freaking out about how crazy it is.
Yeah, the absurdity of it all. And because they are just kids. They're the older kids in this group, but, like, Robin is still in high school. Steve just graduated, so they're still kids. They're still young. You know, I joked about it in season 1 about, you know, well, Tommy's just fine. Meanwhile, Steve's, like, probably got a concussion and a bruised lung. But yeah, just like what I said at the end of season 2, when Billy's just going ham on his face, I'm like, yeah, he could have died from this. It's not that I don't want them to all die or be seriously injured, but I kind of feel like then it takes away from some of the severity of what's happening to them. Like, it cheapens it somehow.
Yeah, because if they aren't going to get the consequences of it, then just have less violence involved. Because otherwise I don't really believe the violence that you're showing because nothing happens of it.
I do kind of appreciate that Robin is never threatened with any kind of, like, they never threaten her with any kind of, like any kind of sexual violence. They don't do anything like that. I don't know that I buy that that wouldn't happen in this scenario, but I'm glad that we don't have to be subject to watching just the threat of it, like, let alone anything else. Back at the cabin, while 11 goes into the astral plane for a long time, searching for more of the flayed, Nancy calls around to investigate whether any more chemicals have gone missing, but nothing. We get one look between Will and Jonathan, which is one of the only one-to-one interactions between them this season, which, like, I get why there's a lot else going on, but their bond was such a cool thing about the previous 2 seasons that I was like, oh, we don't really get anything between them this season. It's kind of a bummer.
I did like where Nancy calls Jonathan after they've had the fight and is like, is Will okay? Is Will safe? And Jonathan's like, why wouldn't he be safe?
Right.
Like, I really...
yeah.
I don't know. I have younger brothers, so I really relate.
That pile of bloody tissues in the bathroom, though, that's considerable. And it prompts the question again, you know, is Elle in pain when she uses her powers? And also it makes me kind of side with Mike a little bit.
Yeah, it seemed like he's got valid concerns.
Because, yeah, that's when Mike and Max descend into their argument over his concern for her safety, and then Max's insistence that 11 is her own person and she knows her own limits and should be the one to decide that and not him. And Nancy and Will both side with Max, but Mike does not back down, and he eventually confronts her and kind of all of them. You know, Heidi said it back in 2019 that they all kind of tend to think of her as sort of this, you know, this battery that just never wears out.
The characters are really cavalier in their assumptions about Elle's powers, and I do think that they use her as a tool. Now, I think that comes from a place of admiration and, like, not from a place of exploitation. I think they assume that she's just really that badass and that she's indestructible. And I think Mike has a good point that Elle will, there's a danger that Elle will think that she has to do it because, you know, I'm the only one who can do it, so on and so forth. And that she will put herself in danger that when she doesn't have to. She will put herself in unnecessary danger because she wants to live up to the admiration of her friends.
But this also is when, like, calls Max out for 11 and she and 11 spying on the boys, and he uses that as an example, which I thought was interesting. He doesn't actually linger on that point for very long. He kind of moves past it to say, like, this is how careless you are with her powers. Then he blurts out, you know, in the culmination of this argument where that the plan puts 11 in too much danger and he loves her and cannot lose her again, which silences everyone until Elle re-enters the room with an update that she's found Billy. I really like a lot of what occurs in this conversation.
Yeah.
It's another really well-balanced argument because they both have really good points. They're both right and they're both wrong. I like that Mike calls them all out, that it isn't even just necessarily to Max. Like, it is the fact that, you know, Nancy, like, even though she's saying a lot of things that I do agree with, like, 11 knows herself. You have to be respectful of her own limits and what she says and what she believes about herself. But Mike is also saying, like, there's not enough concern for the fact that she might be pushing herself too hard.
Because that's how she's been raised, to push herself more and more.
Yeah.
She doesn't really have a sense of what's normal.
Well, and I don't know that this is, like, what they were thinking about when writing this, but this is my headcanon, I guess, that Elle still might be carrying this idea of I am the monster, because that was her whole thing in season 1 was I opened the gate. This is my responsibility. I did, and even though Mike says the whole thing of, no, you're not the monster, you saved me. Like, she has saved a lot of people at this point. She's even closed the gate at this point. But I don't think that anything would have deterred Elle from closing the gate, even if it had meant, I mean, something that I think is really important, actually, about this scene that I think is missing. Like, I like what's here, but I think the one thing that would have made it even more interesting and made it, I think, a little better is if part of Mike's argument was also she sacrificed herself for Dustin and Lucas and I. Max wasn't there to witness that. Neither was Nancy. None of them were. If Mike had brought that up, I think that Lucas would have backed him up because Dustin's not there, but Lucas is, and he was part of that. And I don't know. I wish that element had been present here because there's no way that's not driving a lot of Mike's actions here.
Right, yeah. Although I feel like it might make sense in character for him not to mention it. Like, because just as humans in general, like, that'll be, like, in my mind, or, like, you know, you'll have, like, quite a emotionally fraught, scary situation on your mind. You know that's why you're saying what you're saying, but you just can't talk about that thing, you know?
Maybe. I don't know. Considering how desperate he is to get his point across, I could see him, like, especially because he blurts out the whole, I'm in love with her thing. I don't know. Or maybe, like, Lucas could have brought it up. Because Lucas is the one who's very objective. Like, well, she did sacrifice herself 2 years ago. Like, or something like that.
Right. Elle is the one who best knows her limits, but she might willingly cross them if she thinks it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Or necessary.
Yeah. And again, that's not to say that, like I said, I don't disagree with what Max and Nancy are saying. And I like the fact that this does give us kind of a big fight between, it's not a big fight, but it is a fight between Mike and Max, which has been building since last season. And I like that they're still kind of antagonistic to each other. Probably my only, like, real problem with this scene is when Max says, this is why she jumped your ass. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. We wanted it to be why she dumped him, but it's not. We didn't have any setup for Mike being overprotective. Like,
no, it was because he was being dishonest.
Exactly. Which was kind of all the stuff that we talked about. Heidi and I, and then Jenna and I talked about in chapters 1 and 2, how the fact that it's like, there's no setup of that, and how much richer the beginning of the season would have been if they had established that characterization of Mike, that he's worried about her. Like, it would have created this through line that would have made this moment so much stronger. I mean, this works really well on its own, but...
Yeah, if I recall, I mean, the scenes in the first episode of this season, Mike isn't really a perspective character. We get him from Hopper's point of view. So he's basically an obnoxious brat, and from Hopper's perspective, we don't really get a lot from him. And I feel like I like this scene in part because, like, Mike gets the most chance to say what he's feeling, or I mean, literally, yes, but also, like, he gets a chance to act. Whereas I feel like he just gets kind of like, you know, here's a stereotypical kid who doesn't like that his girlfriend's separating from him. Like, that's a lot of his treatment up to this point.
100%. I like, that's a really good, because this is some of the most in character I think we've seen of him. I like that perspective, though, that you just shared. Like, this idea that the way that Mike is presented in those first couple episodes is through Hopper's perspective. I mean, I would say that isn't how we've been experiencing Mike over the first 2 seasons, right. But that helps. That actually improves my opinion a little bit of the first couple episodes.
Really?
Because
I still don't like them.
Oh no, I don't either. But it helps at least give some, like, I don't know. It helps make it feel less like, what the fuck? Like, because that was the thing. It was just like, who is that? Like, because Heidi even said, like, in 2019, she was like, our immediate reaction from like right after we watched it, she was like, what the fuck is going on with Mike?
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. This feels like Mike.
Yeah.
And yeah, I do think it's appropriate that, not even appropriate, I think it's important that they do follow through on the whole them spying on the boys, because that's one of the few things that it does get, like, really effective setup and payoff. It happens, 11 alludes to it in chapter 4, and then it comes up again here. So overall, the scene isn't perfect necessarily, but I think it's also up there with some of my favorite stuff in this season. It's
in character. You can relate to both sides of the argument. Yeah, and they're not absolute jerks. They're just kind of trying to get their point across, and they care.
It's also very heated. Like, there is a lot of energy, but it feels earned. It feels warranted given the nature of the argument that they're having. It actually reminds me a lot of the argument between Jonathan and Nancy in the car. It's good. I like this scene. This is a scene that I actually enjoy watching quite a lot. Back at Murray's, though, Alexei conveys that the Russians are trying to open a gate between worlds and that they're in Hawkins because the gate has been opened here before.
Mm-hmm.
But does he say why the Russians are doing this? Nope. Because Hop and Joyce, to be fair, are not asking that. They're just asking, what are they doing? They never actually ask him why, which is the question I would be asking, but whatever.
I quite like this scene. Partly, I like translation things, and I wish I knew Russian so I could kind of figure out what's going on. But I like that in this episode, we catch up Robin to what's going on, and Erica, and maybe Murray, because we kind of get Joyce and Hopper, oh, that's what's going on. Whereas I don't think we get Murray's reaction. I would be very curious, is he, reacting to them, or is he reacting to what Alexi's saying?
Mm-hmm. I mean, the closest we get to a reaction from Murray is him and Hopper going into the kitchen and then taking a drink.
Right.
Because they're like, oh, okay. So that's as much as we get. But I agree. I found myself thinking that too. His reaction is a little muted.
Yeah. I mean, I guess being a conspiracy theorist, he has the worst possible assumption all the time. So...
And maybe he's just trying to stay focused with what Alexei is saying, in case he's still talking, maybe.
Oh, yeah,
I don't know.
I've heard with professional translators, they have to do it for half an hour and then stop and then get replaced by another translator because it takes so much concentration. So I'm they have obviously been translating for a while. They have all the cigarettes and the drinks and stuff.
One of my close friends, she is an ASL interpreter, and she says when they have the agency that she works for, when they do day-long jobs, it's her and 3 other translators because they have to cycle through. So it does, and she said exactly that, because the concentration is, you have to be so on when you're doing it. So maybe that's what Murray's doing. Because you're right, it is a fairly understated reaction, which is very out of place in a series that is so over the top.
Right. No, but I like Hopper and Joyce's reactions. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, it's one of the few times when the very showy reaction is appropriate, because it's that's probably one of the worst things Alexei could have said. Mm-hmm. Do they have any idea what they're gonna summon out of it?
Yeah.
I'm saying, I want to know why, but I also understand that their reaction of oh shit is totally understandable. Alexei also includes the detail that 2 people are needed to shut down the machine. This is also the bit where Hopper is I'm gonna get you, I promise I'll get you there. I think this is when they have the Fat Rambo comment. Alexei's just laughing because he's it's impenetrable. You can't get in.
Yeah. Also, why would Alexei actually want to get in?
Right. Yeah.
I thought that, yeah.
Yeah.
He doesn't really say that way, but yeah.
Which is kind of unfortunate, because I actually really like the way that Hopper delivers that line. That also felt a familiar side of Hopper. We'll figure out a way.
Yeah. It might have had more impact if we said it to Joyce, because Alexei probably doesn't care.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my job.
Yeah. Yeah. Meanwhile, Dustin and Erica emerge in a room supplied with the green stuff. That's when Erica notices a cage that looks awfully fit for a Demogorgon before she steals a deadly weapon that they can use for rescuing the others. But that's when Dustin says that the best way for them to help Steve and Robin is to get out and get help. I totally forgot, though, that they dropped this hint about the Demogorgon right here. Because I remember seeing it and then her going, how big did you say the Demogorgon was? It was what? What? But L11 killed it. Why would there be another one? Mm-hmm. Elsewhere in the facility, though, Robin is shouting for help. Girl, what are you doing?
She knows how deep they are.
Yeah. And that's when Steve stirs. And Robin assesses the room and figures out that if they work together, they can kind of hop their chairs together to the nearest table and use the scissors or whatever to cut their ropes. But they topple over. Robin starts laughing. He thinks she's crying at first, but then she's just amused at the absurdity of the whole thing. They kind of commiserate and reminisce about their high school days. I do really like this scene, and I do think that the scene holds up pretty well on rewatch. My only caveat is the fact that I think there's too much, it still feels a little bit too misleading. I would have liked it better if when you went back and watched it again, it felt a lot more clear that there was double meaning going on. But other than that, I love, love, love their chemistry, like their platonic chemistry, because I think most of the stuff that's in this scene actually is platonic in terms of like Steve's, all that stuff was bullshit, and I look forward to more of their friendship.
Yes, I really like this scene. I did have a question though. Robin says, losers pretend to be above it all, but we still just want to be popular, accepted, and normal. I'm like, don't speak for all nerds, Robin.
Yeah.
I guess that there would be some quote-unquote losers who feel like outcasts and they want to be popular. That wasn't really my experience. Like, I didn't want to be popular in high school. I wanted to just kind of fly under the radar and get out. But
yeah, hard same. But it would have been better if maybe she had not said popular, because like I do think there's a level of like we want to be accepted and liked.
Yeah, definitely.
But that doesn't necessarily always mean by the popular crowd. But I don't know. I mean, in high school, I know it seems like that's a much more common thing that people experience. I didn't, but I was very much like you, like, no, just ignore me. Yeah, except like my friends were the art nerds who were also basically ignored. So
right.
Yeah, this is a really sweet moment, and it continues to be. It holds up pretty well. I mean, apart from, like I said, I think it's a little deliberately misleading. But other than that, that's not enough of a like strike against it to like ruin it by any means.
Right,
It still feels really, it's a nice little moment of like humanity, that like character just building, and we get this like just quiet moment in this otherwise very busy episode. But of course that moment is interrupted when the Russians return and a doctor injects, theoretically both of them. We only see him inject the needle into Steve, but they're both high the next time we see them, so. Meanwhile, Elle says that Billy is sitting alone in his room, and the group agrees that it's weird, alone in his room on the 4th of July, so it must be a trap. And Elle remembers receiving Cherry Ives' memory loop, and she thinks that there might be a way to connect with Billy in a similar fashion to find the Mind Flayer source. Because that's the thing that they keep talking about. We need to find the source. We need to find the source. It's a very brief moment, but I love that look between Mike and Elle at the end of that scene when she says, "A way for me to see where he's been." They're very close shots on both Brown and Wolfhard, and it feels like a moment right out of the first season. The rest of what follows feels that way too, because that's when she kind of prepares to go back into the void, and Mike tells her that she doesn't have to do this, but she in turn promises Mike that Billy can't hurt her, and then asks Mike to trust her. And he glances at Max, who gives him a very pointed look, and so then he kind of backs away. I only wish that they hadn't included that look towards Max.
Yeah, I felt like it would have been fine without it. I liked Elle's reaction in particular there. Like, it's so cute. Like, she grabs her finger. But, like, and also she sounds, like, very tired.
That makes a lot of sense. Because, she pretty much continues to just go.
Oh, yeah.
From this point on, so, yeah. So into the void she goes, and she takes Billy's hand and tells him that she wants to see what happened. And at first, when he looks up, the look on his, like, he's got tears in his eyes, and then right before he, like, then grabs her arm in that, like, really tight grip, and she sees the town-wide possession and, like, the Mind Flayer's physical form, like, she gets these flashes. Whew. Yeah, Montgomery's performance throughout the rest of this episode is just absolutely incredible. And I love those the tears in his eyes. It's one of the most subtle things that the season does, and I wonder if that was Montgomery's idea, or if it came from one of the directors, or if it was like a team effort, like they kind of came up with it all together. But it's just such a nice touch, and because I also think that it speaks to the history of his abuse and how it shows that he's been miserable. And just knowing what we know from last season, even before we get anything more from here, like, it feels like a authentic way to show that, like, his pain, I guess.
Yeah. And when he grabs her arm, you see, like, he's got all these bruises and burns and stuff like that. So he hasn't been put into this position willingly.
Far more than any of, like, the memories of his mother or whatever that we see, this almost feels like it shows the depth of how hurt he is with so much less. I really like that. And Elle gets into all of those memories because she like panics and pulls away from him. I do like the way that they cut all that together with her falling, and then it felt very there's a lot of this felt very much like Inception to me.
I had that note too, yeah.
Because it also feels different from what we've seen before.
Mm-hmm.
This does feel like it's a shift in Elle's powers. If anything, it is a continuation or an evolution. I don't know how I feel about it because it is so different from what's come before. But I don't think I mind it. I don't know. I'm kind of conflicted about it. I don't know.
Yeah, I thought it was neat. I kind of like the scene of her falling, and that, like you said, it does feel very Inception because falling, that was part of the thing. And then also, like, you get it back in reverse when she goes the other way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And she experiences different stuff when it reverses,
mm-hmm.
which is kind of neat. Yeah, I think I like it. Because I remember the first time watching it, I remember when we saw the woman and we're like, oh, it's his mother. I remember feeling a little bit, I think I might have rolled my eyes. I think I was so impressed with how they handled everything up to this point with Billy's backstory. And it was like, oh man, we're doing this thing.
Mm-hmm.
I still have trouble articulating why I don't like it. Like, what about it bothers me? Because it doesn't bother me nearly as much as it did on that first watch, but suddenly this like wipes the slate clean. I feel like that's what we're prompted to do with this information. We're supposed to forget about the fact that he treated Max the way he did, or he treated Lucas the way that he did. The fact that he nearly ran the 3 kids off the road with his car just to upset Max. I don't know. To me, this doesn't do as good of a job at making that feel complex and interesting. It feels forced, I guess, when, again, all the stuff with Neil from last season, and then even the just seeing Billy's reaction a minute ago, it felt very understated, and it felt so much more better.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like the little snippets of scenes that we see towards the end of the vision are more effective than the long bit with the mom at the beach, because there are a lot of dead moms in movies. And this doesn't really distinguish her as being a unique individual. It's like, oh, here's a pretty mom who is missing. I feel like it might have worked better if there was like a smaller, more intimate scene with them that sort of distinguishes her as like a quirky individual or something like that. I mean, it's obviously a trope to start off with, and they haven't really done anything new with that trope. Yeah, I didn't hate it, but it didn't really give me more than what it already had, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
My next scene I have is the phone call when
mm-hmm.
Hopper calls Owens's guy, and then Joyce calls him back.
Yeah. This scene is over the top, but I enjoy it. I love me some fierce Mama Bear Joyce.
Yes.
And I love the reaction that the receptionist has, like, yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I like how she's like, I forget exactly what she says, but like, have a good day.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. She's like, okay, I overdid it a little bit there, but...
Well, it reminds me of when she says to Murray, please,
mm-hmm.
earlier.
Right.
And then at the conclusion of that scene is when she also says the bit about, we have to go back to Hawkins. And Hopper's like, the kids are fine. No, we just wait here. And she's like, no, because they're right where the gate is.
Mm-hmm.
They're like right there. And Hopper's like, crap. Okay.
I like she also said our kids.
Mm-hmm.
That was sweet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that it's just this accepted fact, like throughout the season, that Elle is Hopper's daughter. Back in the base, Steve and Robin begin to feel the effects of the serum they were administered, and when the Russians return, they goofily answer the questions in the same way until the doctor is about to start plying off Steve's fingernails, and Robin blurts out that they intercepted the code. And then she goes on to taunt the Colonel for cracking the code, saying that now others know they're there, which is when Steve gives away Dustin's full name, then Hopper's name, and then he taunts them in turn, saying that they're going to, be sent back to Russia in 2 pieces of toast. And then an alarm goes off. I love Steve's little shrug at the end. It's right before the cut. That's a nice edit too. Like, it's a great acting moment, but then the way that it's like one of those subtle editing things I like a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of funny stuff here.
I mean, this is basically stoner comedy. It doesn't get old in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
It's just funny enough that it works. I mean, Truth Serum is usually played for laughs, but I kind of wonder if they opted for comedy here instead of having them act more like disoriented or concerned, or more of a serious interpretation of what being drugged like that might be like, because they thought it might dilute the severity of what's happening to them. In some ways, I think it's an odd juxtaposition of comedy and seriousness, that the alarm summons the Russians to all these holes in the floor that the green goo has like created, and that's when Dustin and Erica break into the room using the deadly weapon and untying Steve and Robin's bonds. Dustin says, "Get ready to run." I believe that's the last time we see them in this episode. Yeah,
I did like Steve's, "That's crazy, I was just talking about you."
Yeah.
How weird.
Yeah.
When Dustin comes in with the deadly weapon and he hits the doctor with it really, like, noticeably, it's like, did Dustin just kill that guy?
Maybe.
So he stabbed him with the electric shock, like, in the chest.
Yeah.
And Dustin kind of, like, looks at him, and then we just kind of move on. Like, did Dustin kill him? I mean, Elle has killed a bunch of people. We know that. But, like, her sense of normalcy is not there. Whereas Dustin's is. He knows what it is to be an average kid, or not so average kid, but he's smart, but he seems to have a loving mother, you know, fairly happy childhood there. But it's like, he might have just killed someone, and he might not find out if he did or not.
That's a really good point.
So that was what stood out to me, but I feel like we're probably not going to address it just with the way it was held up.
Yeah, and again, I think we're meant to be more distracted by the comedy of that moment, but that's a really good point. I had not thought about that. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that.
I mean, he obviously had to. They had to get Steve and them out, and that was the weapon that they had. But yeah, it just feels like realistically, Dustin's character would probably be a little cut up about that for quite a while, especially like if he might never know if he killed someone. Yeah, I don't think that we're gonna get a conclusion on that.
Yeah, and I guess to some degree they have to treat all of this stuff with the Russians a little bit lightly, because if they were really gonna commit to this setup, again, like, I think what's happening to Steve is, as awful as it is, it would probably be a lot worse. There would be no way that any of them would actually get out of this. So that's why the Russians are characterized with such a broad brush. So I think because they chose to go this route, they have to treat it a little more lightly. But again, it feels so different from how they treated Hawkins' lab, for example, how they treated Brenner. Like Elle killing the guards, that was under duress. Like, they were, you know, and like you said, her perspective is so skewed. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's a little bit of an opportunity wasted, I think. Good catch. And that's when we delve back into Billy's memories and the history of Neil's abuse, or some of it anyway. And that's like, yeah, Billy's mother arguing with Neil, Billy asking her to come home, turning into a bully himself, and meeting Max. I think it was more powerful to not have the full backstory. Like, I think having just this impact between Neil and Billy at the end of season 2, again, there's no Mind Flayer involved.
Yeah.
And it just felt like it was so visceral, because you weren't in this like maelstrom of memory. It was just this scene between father and son, and like, I just remember that being so impactful, and this just felt like it's buried under all this spectacle. Even if you want to compare that to the bit with like Elle experiencing Terry Ives's memories, Elle experienced that through Terry's point of view, kind of. It wasn't like this, she got to see these clips like surrounding her. It was like she just kind of experienced it as Terry did. And I thought that was also much more effective. In this sequence of memory, we don't see those exchanges between Neil and Billy last season, so it feels like they deliberately left it out. And that's another why leave that out? It would have brought it all together, and I think that would have helped a lot. I think just including some of those cutaways would have gone a long way. Also, because we don't see any of Billy as played by Dacre Montgomery in this part. It's only him as a kid.
Right, that's a good point. It's hard to tie it together when it's a different actor.
Yeah, because it's like, I think that would have helped say, like, that kid is still in the grown-up Billy, you know, that boy is in there. And because we never see them, like, kind of at the same time in the same context, it doesn't, I don't know. Especially with how much has happened over the last several years since season 3, it feels particularly uncomfortable to me that this season never addresses the fact that he's racist. Like, that does not sit well with me. We're just supposed to feel bad for him because of all of these things that happened to him. And I do, but it feels like it's like we're just supposed to forget.
Yeah, I agree. Like, the scene with his father was a lot more powerful. The little snippets towards the end were like his father's yelling at him and calling him names, and then he uses the same names to like call this other kid. That seemed much more powerful than the scene at the beach. It sort of shows his character arc. There isn't anything about him surfing that isn't in the character arc, really. Mm-hmm. Except maybe he misses surfing, but
I do though love the look, the like scathing look that 11 gives Neil when she like walks by.
yeah.
But yeah, Elle makes it through to the eye of the storm, and she identifies the mill, and she says the name aloud, and Jonathan jumps up to go look through the phone book for the address, and when he finds it, Mike tells Elle, we found it, get out of there. But when Elle tries to extract herself, the in-season memories flash by. That's when we get that reverse, including a shot of Heather on the ground with the Flayer's tentacle thing on her face, which was something that has not been shown up to this point. And eventually Elle lands back in the cabin, but it's empty. And then Billy Flayer steps out from what is actually Hopper's room, and he begins this monologue. Now I see you. Now we can all see you. This whole scene, it's so good. Mm-hmm. It gets a little gross towards the end. I don't love the final like couple of beats, but most of the sequence is so well done.
Yeah.
I love this, and it's properly frightening in like the best way. All this stuff between Billy Flayer and Elle is just fantastic. Again, their performances are amazing. This whole sequence is enhanced significantly too by the music, which is, I'm gonna butcher this pronunciation, but Satyagraha, I think is how you say it, which is an opera. I had a hard time figuring out when it was composed and who composed it, but I know that it's scene 1, confrontation and rescue, but that's as much information as I can get. But that sequence of music is amazing. It's perfect for this. I thought it was score. And yeah, just the whole sequence, it's brutal and it's sad. And again, the performances on all sides are just stellar. And I kind of like to think that part of why Elle is so emotional and sad is because, and scared, is, I do think here is where she's reminded of the fact that she opened the gate. He tells her, you let us in. But I also kind of wonder if maybe she's also kind of experiencing the tragedy of this, like watching what's happened to Billy and knowing it's probably unlikely that he's gonna come back, that the person he used to be is probably not in there anymore. And on top of all the innocent lives that have been lost, including his. The tear that falls down his face, it's just like, oh.
That was effective.
Yeah. Ross Hawkins, various people of various ages abandon their 4th of July festivities. And this is when Billy Flayer says that, this is when he says that Elle let them in, and how now she must let them stay. They've been building it for her, and all that pain was for her, and now it's time to end it, following which they will end her and everyone she loves, which makes Elle scream no and throw him backwards. And that's when she emerges from the void, fully screaming and crying, and breaks down in Mike's arms. And finally, the flayed all file into the mill cellar, where they disintegrate into piles of goo and merge into the Mind Flayer's main single body.
Yeah, my note about that is gross lemming march.
Mind Flayer bursts out of the cellar, roars, and cut to black.
Yep.
When Billy Flayer says, we are going to end everyone, this kind of, like, I think this is probably the closest we get to a full, like, mission statement of what the Mind Flayer actually wants and is trying to do. Mm-hmm. It kind of made me go, so they just want to exterminate the whole human race?
Or infect it, however you view what they're doing.
Because I'm like, so you're Dalek. You're a Dalek, basically. Exterminate. I'm like, it's still a little bit vague. I don't know that we need more of an explanation than that, but is that all there is to it? It doesn't necessarily feel totally definitive because it's so much involved in the threatening towards Elle, I guess. And yeah, that's a hell of a place to end. Yeah. Final thoughts.
Yeah, well, like I said, I liked this episode in general. after like the scene with the mayor. I just didn't have any notes after that because I was engrossed. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I liked people finding out about stuff. So okay, we filled Robin in, like now she's on board, and we filled Erica in, things like that.
I think this episode has a lot of some of my favorite moments from the season. There's a lot of the same stuff that made the end of the first season so good, which is this is kind of when the teams are starting to converge, like in an interesting kind of parallel to what's happening with the Mind Flayer. Like this is kind of like the different groups are starting to like finally team up and be on the same page.
There isn't a whole lot of Mike until this point, or a couple parts where he actually seemed to be the character that we knew and loved from earlier seasons, and we don't get a whole lot after. So it's kind of nice to see them getting a little bit of time here. Also, we don't get very much about Lucas. He's like, I noticed he's like present in several action scenes. Like, oh, okay, great, Lucas is doing something. But we don't get a whole lot apart from that. He's sort of in the background.
That's a good point too. This was the first episode, though, in watching it, when I kind of started to think that the season started off considerably lighter. I read the quote that a lot of their intention was they wanted to lighten things up, you know, after such a dark season, 2 seasons. But it finally kind of hit me that it might start out lighter, but it actually is some of the darkest content they've ever done, which they even admit in the book as well, that season 3 has a lot more body horror. It almost makes the darker stuff feel that, by contrast, it makes it feel that much darker, which Jenna kind of spoke to that. Like the spectacle of the mall in the beginning, like being kind of at odds with a lot of the darker stuff later on, that does feel intentional, and it does feel like they're trying to deliberately set it up. But I kind of feel like that's what I liked so much about the first 2 seasons, is that it was kind of at this like kind of suspenseful pitch all along. So the fact that they like ramped it way up and turned up the saturation and made it super bright and flashy, and then we end up in this very dark, like visually dark cellar with the Mind Flayer, with this pretty dark psychological idea of people just dissolving into like mounds of flesh and bone. So I don't know, there's something that kind of bugs me a little bit about this idea of like, we wanted to lighten things up, except not really.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely didn't get the impression that it was lighter.
More in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, what I remember from episode 1 was like Hopper being kind of a psychopath towards Mike and Elle, them being annoying, particularly Mike, Billy hooking up with a married woman who I didn't remember who she was, and I'm like, what is going on? Mrs. Wheeler, why are we following this nasty guy and this adultery plot? Like, I don't care. So yeah, that didn't read to me as being like light and comedic. It was just like nothing's happening that I care about.
I mean, even if in the first episode you get Will has the sensation, it's not quite as intense as like, and maybe that's a better way to say it, like it's not as intense as the first 2 seasons, not right away, but I think it ends up ramping up to being a lot darker by the end than the previous 2. Yeah, it made me want to revisit that sentiment of like, we wanted to lighten things up a little, and I'm like, yeah, but then you went darker than you've ever gone before.
Right, yeah.
It's more sinister, it's more demented in terms of like what is happening to these people.
Yeah, I mean, the body count in this episode alone is fairly high.
Very high. And the kids, some of these people that are flayed are kids.
Yeah, I made a note that Adam was the kid who got flayed, that they show anyway.
Prompted by the fact that Erica notices the Demogorgon cage, I found myself like thinking about, in terms of the antagonists, like why they feel, like why the Russians feel different, and then having the idea of the Demogorgon reinserted into the mix, it kind of made me step back and kind of assess the way that the villains and the antagonists have been handled over the course of all 3 seasons. So in season 1, the lab accidentally opened the gate via 11. So you had the lab trying to cover up the fact that they'd done this by accident. You know, Brenner's goal was to spy on Russians. And now they had this Demogorgon on the loose. And that because that's sort of on them, they've then basically murdered a bunch of people. And the fact that they were like experimenting on children. Season 2 was about the Mind Flayer and the Demodogs, also both from the Upside Down. But the lab was still trying to fix the problem from season 1. Then, in season 3, the Russians are trying to open a new gate, and then you have the Mind Flayer from last season. The Russians, which are kind of the new Hawkins lab, and the Mind Flayer have nothing to do with one another. Not really. They're not connected.
Kind of a coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
The Upside Down, I think maybe you've mentioned on the podcast before, but it seems like it's like the entire thing is sentient. It's all sort of like different manifestations of the same consciousness. And it seems like maybe having been aware that there is another world it can infect, sort of virusy, it's planning to take over that world in the same way that it has its own.
Mm-hmm. But the Russians aren't really even aware of it, it seems like, and so they're trying to open the gate to another world, but we also don't have a reason for that. So the fact that there's like this, you have these two antagonists that up until this point have been connected, at least tangentially. Now we don't have that. There's no connection really between these two forces that are at play. So that might be part of why I find the third season a little unsatisfying. Like, it doesn't lead to any culmination in which the two antagonistic forces are actually connected, even in some small way. At this point, we've really got all the information like we need to essentially know what is ultimately going on with both of them.
Yeah, the Russians don't even know about the Mind Flayer.
Mm-hmm. Or if they do, they really don't seem to care.
Yeah.
And I'll just touch on this briefly, that this is the episode where I feel like when I think about this whole we gotta beat Steve up every season thing, this is where it feels like when I think about that, when I hear people say that, I think of this scene and I'm like, really?
Mm-hmm.
This is what you want? This is really what you want? It just feels really mean.
Yeah, I didn't used to be quite so sensitive to that. It's just sort of cartoon violence, bash, 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 or whatever. But, yeah, after my brother was in a bad bike accident, his front wheel of the bike fell off while he was riding it without a helmet. This was back in 2017. It was weeks of recovery from that. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, when someone's, like, getting a head injury in media now, and I'm just like, no, don't get up again, sit down.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
It would have made the stakes feel higher if they had some of these injuries actually stay with the characters for a while. Like, I would have appreciated it, for example, if, like, next season, like, if Steve had some kind of scar, like, over his eye or something. But I won't belabor the point. I know I've talked about it a lot, but my heart just breaks for him in that sequence.
Yeah, I'm just like, because he's unconscious for a while.
Yeah.
And that happened to Hopper earlier as well. And it's just like, that's a problem. He could have brain bleeding. Like,
yeah, I mean, like, there's no way he doesn't have broken ribs. There's no way.
And Jonathan too.
Yeah, and probably Nancy.
Past episode. Yeah,
for that matter. Yeah. I also kind of like the fact that, like, up until now, like, her hair has been a little more raw, a little more her. Like, she's been putting on this appearance, like, for the newsroom, like, all this time. So in all, I have to say, like, apart from a couple moments here and there, I actually really enjoyed this episode too, like, more than I expected to. So that concludes our contemplation on Chapter 6, E Pluribus Unum. If you've got comments, questions, thoughts, you can join the conversation. We're on Instagram and Facebook as @CoffeeAndContemplationPod and TikTok as Coffee and Hawkins. Like, share, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and consider leaving us a review.
Thanks for listening.
Over and out.
Running and kind of running through the room, Dustin does this amazing squawk. It's like, like just as he's barreling past some Russian guy.
Yeah.
It's just an incredible noise. I'm like, what is that?
I think I missed that. I'm going to go back and look for that.
Yeah, I want to like see a repeating YouTube video of it or something, because it's a great sound. Sort of like a combination of aggression and terror. Yeah.